Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us here today for a town hall discussion focused on the updates to the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and the impending compliance deadline. I'm Adam Scarzafava, AVP for Edge Events and Digital Marketing here at Edge. Just going to take a few minutes at the top to, for those who might not be as familiar with Edge, kind of place Edge in the discussion here and give some context for why we're hosting this session. So Edge is a nonprofit member-based research and education network and a technology consortium. We were formed by the President's Council for Higher Education here in New Jersey, where we're based. And we were formed back around the year 2000 because I think the presidents got together and pretty wisely realized that the internet was here to stay and they needed to build themselves some capabilities to really succeed in that digital world. So Edge was formed to do exactly that. The mission has grown in the years since. We certainly continue to serve higher ed in the research community. That's the backbone of everything that we do. But we really have expanded to serve any other groups that have a public serving mission, really, including K-12, government, healthcare, nonprofits, libraries, really anybody that receives public funding, serves the public. We're here to serve them in the effective use of technology. So how do we do that? EdgeNet is the backbone of everything that we do. When Edge was initially formed, we were formed to build a network around the state of New Jersey. That network has now grown in the years since. We continue to own and operate it. And now it's a fully regional network as well. We have members that are joining and connecting into the network from New York and Pennsylvania. We've built connections down to North Carolina for different research activities. So that's really, really, sort of the heritage of Edge, but also the backbone of everything we do today. Edge Discovery is a technology-based research and discovery framework. That's where we're making lots of these connections with the research community, really up and down the East Coast and across the country to work really effectively with our members in the research space. Edge Market is the procurement side of things that we do, now operating a nationwide co-op with contracts for things like ERP, hardware and software solutions across the board. Lots of really, I think important, impactful contracts there to speed the procurement process for our members. We do events, networking, and community building, just like what we're doing here today. And then thought leadership and solution development in a number of areas where members have pain points, members have gaps that we can jump in from a nonprofit perspective and with nonprofit pricing and rates and help to solve some of these challenges. One of those areas, of course, is on cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance. And that really brings us to the topic here today and the things that our members, that higher ed institutions across the country should be thinking about as it relates to the GLBA compliance updates, the things that you should be doing in the home stretch here before compliance deadlines, and a bit about how Edge can help. So with that, I will get out of the way and pass it over to Dr. Dawn Dunkerley, Edge's lead virtual chief information security officer, and we'll get into just a bit of content, and then, like I said, take as many questions as we can. So I'll stop sharing, and then Dawn, the floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you so much, Adam. Go ahead and share my screen. So welcome, everybody. I looked in the participants and see lots of friendly faces, folks I know. So glad to see you all, and glad to meet those of you who may not have been to one of our webinars. So a little bit about me. As Adam said, I'm the principal virtual chief information security officer. We do a lot of work in that space, and we do a lot of work in that space with higher ed. And one of the big focuses that we've had lately is on Gramm-Leach-Bliley. So if you've seen one of our GLBA webinars before, you will recognize these slides. Nothing new, the content's still there, but we had a lot of learning go on in the last few months with GLBA. So a good time as we're coming up in a couple of weeks on the deadline to talk about kind of some of the things we've learned, some of the pain points that we're coming across, and then kind of what we expect in the future. So GLBA is nothing new. It's been in place for many years, actually, but this is a update to the safeguards rule. So as you see here, there are two components: the privacy rule and the safeguards rule. So privacy rule, for those of you who may not be as familiar with GLBA, is basically exactly what it sounds like. So making sure that when you receive the private information associated with a student, primarily, that information is kind of handled appropriately from a privacy perspective. So that is unchanged with this amendment. What we are really focused on here is the updates to the safeguards rule. So what are the controls that we have put into place to protect this particular information? So a little bit of a background about GLBA. So it's a financial services act. So primarily you see GLBA focused on banks and credit unions and people who are doing, kind of consumer and commercial loans. But because of, higher education processing student loans and the financial aid aspect of it as well, that's why higher ed ends up becoming, responsible for making sure that we put these things into place. GLBA is just kind of a forcing function, quite frankly, to do a lot of things that should have been in process or being done anyway. So we'll talk about kind of what those end up being. So new and updated provisions. Again, we've been through this before in previous webinars, and to Adam's point, we're going to kind of move quickly through this and give time for questions if people have them, but just kind of an overarching view of what this is. So a single individual is on the hook for the information security program. So one of the questions that we do get quite a bit on this is, can that be a third party like myself as a virtual CISO for different higher ed institutions? And the answer is yes. We can be that qualified individual, but in some cases that ends up being maybe the IT director or the CIO, or whatever that job title ends up being that we work with. Six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. But that person does need to report to the board of directors, and they need to be able to be responsible for overseeing and implementing. So the single point kind of on the hook for a lot of the controls that we're going to talk about. Risk assessments are a new big thing. We're doing risk assessments in writing. The folks that we're working with, we're basically cataloging those risks in a risk register. So understanding the threats and the impact associated with different events. And then one of the things that they're very explicit about in the safeguards, the new safeguards, are the ability to assess the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the impact associated with one of those events. So what would the impact to CIA, the CIA triad, very classic in cybersecurity, what would the impact be to the CIA of a particular system, or the information associated with that system, if something happened? Everything from just poor behavior from a general user, all the way to we lost HVAC in the server room and everything went down because it got too hot. So some of the more physical impacts as well. So writing those things down, understanding what we think the risks are, and then what are the mitigations? What is the plan to mitigate or remediate those things? Both things that are in place now, as well as what are we going to do in the future? So actually cataloging those things. I do want to point out the bumper sticker at the bottom. You'll see across these slides, most, if not all of these things that we're talking about are things that the insurance companies are already asking for. So when I said, GLBA is kind of a forcing function for things that we really ought to be doing anyway, the insurance carriers are asking for these things as well. So it's important that we, acknowledge that, this not only gets us right from a GLBA perspective, but it helps us with our insurance requirements, which if you go back and look at the webinars we've had in the past, we've talked about that a lot. And there's just the right things to do. They're the best practices for a reason. This is a bit of an eye chart, so we'll move quickly through this. Multi-factor authentication. Adam and I were talking kind of before this about multi-factor. If you don't have it already, you're probably not going to get it in place before June the 9th. But just understanding, again, what are those systems that are processing this information for students? And I will tell you the interpretation of the information that is covered by GLBA is broad enough that I really, really recommend, quite frankly, multi-factor authentication for faculty and staff writ large. Would love to have it for the students as well, but faculty and staff, because it's the right thing to do, but also the wording for GLBA, who it applies to, is basically if a person is able to make a judgment about a student's ability to attend an institution, and again, if you think broadly about grades and student information, at an institution, not just financial, but private information, then that person needs to have multi-factor authentication. Again, it's the right thing to do. GLBA is just a forcing function for that. Actually, the next few of these kind of, to me, revolve around data must be inventoried and classified according to sensitivity. So you have to know what you have. So the inventory process, what do we have kind of on the network from a, college or university managed system, or the information then associated with those systems. So understanding what we have, classifying the information, based on the sensitivity, and where is that located on the inventory that we specified. So I talk about that first, because then we need to have access controls in place, both physical and logical. So making sure that not everybody has access to all of our data, segmenting that sensitive data off appropriately, applying the principle of least privilege. Again, not everybody needs to have everything, so only the people that have the need for that information, the need to know, those access controls are put into place to make sure that we have that principle of least privilege associated. Again, knowing what we have and where it's at, encrypting in transit. So if we're using things that are in the cloud, making sure that we're using encryption in transit. If we have things stored in our own systems, encryption at rest. So the encryption of information, this is an important thing to note here, that we have a few controls that, while GLBA is being much more prescriptive about the things that we have to do, some of these things, if we can't put them into place, we have the ability for that single individual. So the individual who is responsible for the care and feeding of this information security program, they are able to say, we are choosing not to do encryption at rest, for example, because we have compensating controls that are equal to or greater than what we have, encryption at rest, for example. So that single individual does need to be able to specify, hey, we're not doing this because of, this, XYZ reason, and here's what we're doing to compensate for that. While I'm talking about that, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the last one. Procedures must be in place for the secure disposal of customer information within 2 years of the data's last use. We're not going to do that in most cases, because that doesn't actually meet legal requirements for the state in many, if not all cases. So we need to be able to say, we're not actually getting rid of the student information. We're keeping it for X number of years or indefinitely. So here are the things that we're doing. Encryption is a great example of that. We're encrypting things, so we're not actually disposing of those things as the GLBA says, but here's in writing what we're doing to be able to compensate for that.
Thanks for jumping in and making that last point. We actually had a question come in as you're going through that slide asking about the note that for disposal of financial documents within 2 years.
Yep.
But retention rules are typically much longer than that. So
yes,
we're definitely helping with that, right?
Yep. Glad to. I'm actually not looking at the chat, so thank you for making sure I'm covering all my bases. But yes, again, that's where that qualified individual comes in and says, hey, we're not doing that, but here's what we are doing to compensate for that, and just being able to speak to it. Not a lot of people are doing software development necessarily within the higher ed space, but if you are, putting those secure development practices, so secure software design into place, and then the secure change management process. So what are we talking about with change management? Kind of, an overarching process for when we're going to make changes, whether they be hardware, software, infrastructure. What is the process to make sure that we're vetting those changes appropriately, and making sure the right people get to kind of thumbs up or thumbs down on these changes to our environment. Logging and system monitoring. Again, they're not terribly prescriptive about what what tools you're supposed to use on this, just that we need to make sure that we are actually keeping an eye both from an external and an internal perspective for negative events that might affect us. Penetration testing, that's one of the long poles in the tent. So having the situation in place where we're testing at least annually from a third party. So we've actually recently begun offering this as a service out of kind of our edge security offering, because penetration testing, quite frankly, finding a good provider, getting on the calendar and it not costing a fortune is a little bit of a unicorn, but I think I'm proud to say, cracked the code on that one. So penetration testing ends up being, again, the long pole in the tent for a lot of folks, because you have to bring in kind of a trusted third party. So that's a big one for folks. Vulnerability assessments. So not only doing the vulnerability scanning, so your Nessus or your Qualys or whatever, but actually assessing, here's the scan, but also understanding kind of the vulnerabilities associated with the physical aspects of the organization, with the people aspects of the organization, with the process aspects. So it's not just technical, understanding where we are from a vulnerability perspective writ large. We do those as well. That's a really good kind of offering that we provide, that a lot of folks kind of need to start doing at least annually, those assessments. Written incident response plans. So, hey, something happens, we have a ransomware attack, who's going to be the team that gets called up? What are the steps going to be? When do we call the insurance company in? When do we get legal counsel? So having those things in place, and also testing them. So we recommend at least annually doing a tabletop exercise or something of the sort, where we go through a scenario and talk about what does the plan say we would do, who needs to be called in based on this scenario, and go from there. So again, a lot of these things are things that you will have seen before on your insurance kind of questionnaires that are coming out. They're just the right things to be doing. So again, GLBA is sort of serving as a forcing function. And then a couple of last things here as well: security training and personnel requirements. So personnel, our IT and security teams need to be trained, but also the kind of faculty and staff and students ideally need to be trained for what's going on, from a threat perspective. Are we seeing a lot of, again, emails, phishing emails, people calling in and doing old school social engineering, asking to have passwords reset? All of those things are still happening. Financial fraud, so fake invoices coming in. We need to be training people at least annually, but this GLBA now says those trainings have to be updated. So you can't use the same training program and the same content year after year after year without updating them. They need to understand what's expected of them to not only adhere to the GLBA requirement, just best practices. The second bullet there is also really important. Keeping verification that training requirements have been met. So it makes it really difficult to do something like, let's have a big in-person session. People, can just come in without signing in and listen to what we have to say. We actually now need to have a log of who has been trained and be able to provide that. So training at least annually has to be updated based on new threats, new vulnerabilities, new requirements. Everybody needs to know what they're supposed to do, but we also have to verify that those people have done it. And then finally, the oversight of service providers. So periodic assessments of their service providers. And how we do this, and those folks who work with me in the audience know that we do a lot of work with BitSite. So we offer some services to do essentially the vendor risk management services, understanding essentially what they look like from almost a credit score perspective from their own security practices. So we do a lot of work kind of with that tool to have an overarching view of what they look like from a vulnerability perspective. But we also utilize a tool called the HECVAT. So the Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Tool. You'll see it sometimes called the Cloud Assessment Tool because there is two versions of the HECVAT. Actually, three versions of the HECVAT. There's a full one, a light one, and then there is actually an on-premises version of the HECVAT. And what that allows you to do is get an understanding of how are they going to handle your data? How do they protect themselves from an internal perspective? What are their incident response policies and procedures? What do they look like from a penetration testing perspective? So holding them to the same standard that we hold ourselves. So we use kind of those tools together to gauge kind of what is the risk associated with a third party. So now we are required to do that, on a periodic basis. So again, things that we, in a lot of cases, should have been doing or maybe have been doing already, now are required to be done. And I believe that is it. So I will stop sharing and then answer any questions that we might have from the audience. So I'll turn it back over to you, Adam.
Great, thanks. So just a quick note to answer a question that came in. Yes, we'll give a copy of the slides as well. After we finish the webinar, we'll do video, and then you'll be able to get a PDF too. Question about the security training side of things. Is security training an ongoing effort or something required X number of times a year?
At a minimum annually. They do specify that the training has to be updated at least annually. So in a perfect world, we're doing training all the time. In whether it's phishing tests that have kind of on the fly training, or even just simple emails that go out to faculty, staff, and students. But we need to be able to show that we're updating the training at least annually. And again, we have to have that validation requirement. So I would say that's, at a minimum annual that you can, again, catalog who has been trained.
Cool. Thank you. Another question we have are, what are the top priority items that you see in those updates? What do institutions need to have, locked down first and foremost in your organization?
My dog apparently has a question also in the background. A question of why haven't I guess fed her this morning again. So again, priorities of effort, and we're 2 weeks out. So I would say aligning both the GLBA priorities as well as again the things that are required by the insurance carriers. Multi-factor authentication is going to end up being your big one, and it's going to be tough to roll out in 2 weeks if you don't have it already, but having at least a plan in place to how we're going to get at least those critical systems and the critical users with multi-factor is going to end up being the big one. The penetration testing, again, is something that I want to really, stress to people. Penetration tests are not vulnerability scans. There are different things. So making sure that you at least have a penetration test scheduled with someone before that date would be ideal. Or a kind of get well plan if you don't. That's really getting a lot of folks, because the pen test teams are booked up. They're actual people actually trying to hack into you, so they get booked up quickly. So those two things are really the long poles in the tent, as I said previously, for a lot of folks, because they take a lot of kind of outside resources or big shifts in the culture from the multi-factor. For example, are you going to do tokens or keys? Some folks are doing tying it to their badging. Are you going to use your phones? And then sometimes people don't like using their personal phone for multi-factor. So the lot of hard work going into those. A lot of the other things, quite frankly, we can come up with the plans. We can develop. We can do the assessments. Those things that we can do kind of internally. But those two big things, both from a cultural, financial perspective, as well as a third-party perspective, are proving to be big lifts for a lot of folks.
Yeah. Another question, just circling back to the training for a second. Our HR department has been hesitant to require this type of training. Can we use GLBA as sort of the excuse to push that forward and make that a priority?
Absolutely. So training is across the schools that we work with, there's a spectrum of the people who have full leadership support. Let's train them all the time. Let's do phishing tests. Let's do all these things that we need to do to train up the faculty, staff, and in some cases students. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's the HR doesn't want to do it, or the union said we can't do it. GLBA requires it. So it's now, again, to use the term I've used previously, a forcing function. Absolutely. You have to do it now. So just let them know, hey, this is what we're going to do.
And that's, I would guess that's probably a role that we've played as kind of an outside voice to help some of those conversations along and help make that point, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. A few more questions are on their way in. We've migrated from having an SEIM for log collecting and plan to use some of those funds as we have required an MDR and identity protection system. Can you describe what the logging requirement is?
So a lot of these requirements, except for the ones that I kind of explicitly pointed out where they get very prescriptive, they don't detail necessarily, you must be doing X, Y, Z. So if you want to maybe shoot a note, follow up after kind of after the webinar, we can talk about some kind of logging best practices, but it's not terribly prescriptive from that end.
Okay, leave it kind of open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
Other than by our insurance carrier, how is our compliance to be reported and to whom? So I guess this kind of gets at, and if nobody asked, I was going to kind of circle back at the end and ask, what do we expect enforcement to look like? How, how's that all gonna shake out, do you think?
That's a good question. So I would say in your financial aid office, or someone who's dealing with the student loan side of things, they should already have been engaged with GLBA previously. Again, it's been in effect since, I believe, 2003. So reporting has already been taking place, whether or not you have been engaged in it or not, from a IT and security perspective. I will tell you, having been on the other side of things, being involved with institutions who have gotten notices from the Department of Education about, you're missing this plan, you have X number of days before, we, have the ability to cut off your ability to process those student loans. It does enforcement. Let's get back together in a year and see, let's compare, notes. I don't know how they're going to come and ask for things. I wish I did. Are they going to just start sending out requirements for, big documentation packets? How are they going to do it? I don't know. So what I would recommend is for everybody, if you haven't already been engaged with GLBA in the past, somebody within financial aid or the equivalent office should have already. And if they go to them and they don't know what GLBA is, we have a larger problem than just cybersecurity.
Yep. Okay. Few more questions here. Does GLBA require higher ed institutions to send consumer privacy policy notices to students similar to like ones I get from my bank every year? If so, is there a template you recommend that institutions can get access to?
I will be the first one to tell you I'm not as familiar with the privacy aspects of it, but no, I do not believe they do. But if you want to follow up, we have a template for everything under the sun. But no, I don't believe they do. And if they did, again, financial aid probably should have already been doing that. So again, the privacy rules were unchanged.
Yeah. So one of the big themes here is probably make sure IT and the financial offices are really tightly
are talking to each other. Absolutely.
Okay. One more question right now. What does a written information security plan include in detail, since it's a requirement for GLBA? So I guess big picture, what should be in that written information security plan?
So the WISP there is going to actually detail the aspects of the program. So basically, just take all the things we just talked about. So your multi-factor approach, your data kind of classification, and your inventory approach. All the things that we just talked about that you need to have in place to protect this information. The WISP document should detail how those things are taking place. So it's basically laying out the paper documentation of the program that you've put in place. So all those things we just talked about and how they're protecting this specific GLBA covered information, but the institution kind of writ large need to be in that document. So you could just simply go through and just say, these are the things we said we had to do, and here's how we're doing them.
Yeah, sort of checklist plus comment on here's what we're up to, here's how we're solving for this. Okay.
Absolutely.
No more questions right now. We definitely still have time available. We're gonna let this thing run till 11 if there are more questions. So please, if anybody else has anything in mind, from the very simple to the very complex, there are lots of moving pieces here, and I'm sure there's still some open-ended questions and concerns for folks as we get close to these next couple weeks. So please, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A if you do have any additional questions. We'll hang for a little bit here. Any other sort of big picture, kind of priorities, rankings? What do you think is going to be, maybe what do you think is going to be, or what have you seen be the most difficult piece of this to address for institutions as you've been working them through the process? I mean, we covered some of the stuff that you have to go outside for, the MFA, the pen tests, and that adds a layer of complication just because you can't necessarily do it yourself. Has anything else jumped out as being particularly difficult for institutions to kind of get in order, and have you found good ways to get through that?
Yeah, the training, kind of to the previous question, the training aspect does seem to be kind of difficult. Again, it's a real cultural shift. So different institutions basically saying, we have it in our contracts that we can't require adjunct faculty, for example, to be trained. So now we're having to think, we have a requirement in again, not only GLBA, but also, from an insurance perspective and from a best practice perspective, we should be training people. And if a adjunct has access to the systems that a full-time faculty member has, we need to be mindful of that as well. So changing the culture in some organizations has been really difficult to say, maybe we haven't done this in the past, but we're going to do it now. And what are kind of some different approaches? Do we end up doing a system like a Know Before, where we have that training online, or maybe we roll in the cybersecurity training into the annual training that they have to do through HR. So just different, FERPA and different things that they have to be trained on. Let's put some modules in there for cybersecurity, or maybe we do have a webinar and we take the roll call of who was involved. Different approaches, but again, changing the culture where it directly impacts the user has stymied a lot of folks.
Yeah,
to put it lightly.
Yeah, culture is always the more difficult thing to change. Some of this stuff, I guess if you throw enough money and time at it, you can move the needle, but culture can't be solved by that. So
absolutely
makes sense. We did have somebody ask in the chat how to engage with Edge if there are further questions or if you might need support. I just dropped back in the chat to everyone a couple emails that are going to be useful for you for getting to Edge and getting to some resources if you need assistance. Michelle Ferraro and Aaron Brink are two lead folks that work directly with members to make sure that they can get access to the right resources within Edge. If you reach out to Michelle or Aaron, they'll be able to direct the traffic, get you in touch with Dawn and her team, and/or any of our other resources. Edge is chock full of CISOs and technologists and everybody, so we definitely can help you to solve some of these challenges. So certainly reach out to Michelle or Aaron if there's a need. Looks like we have another question in through the Q&A, which is great. Our compliance platform has FTC safeguards as a framework. Would this be good enough to follow for our portion of compliance?
Again, I anticipate that FTC safeguards are very closely aligned. So it's, again, GLBA is not terribly prescriptive about a lot of these things, like how you do it. So you could follow those guidelines. You could follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example. We have institutions that are following the kind of higher level, the NIST 800-53, which is the risk management framework that the federal government uses. So if you find a platform and a set of safeguards that meet these requirements, and you like that, then go ahead. Really, again, they're not as prescriptive about how you do things, just making sure that you do them.
But I guess whatever framework you might be looking at, it's worth taking that double check to make sure that all those checklist items are
absolutely doing a kind of a crosswalk between the two.
Right.
If you're looking for a framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework is a great way to go. But certainly just do that crosswalk, make sure that you're covering all the requirements of this states, and then you're good to go.
Cool. No additional questions right now. Anything else big picture that are like with the members we're working with through this? Are there questions that have come up or bumps in the road that they didn't expect? Like, were there things that maybe we didn't expect to be a challenge to work through, or what?
Again, the inventory of assets. So understanding what we have, can sometimes end up being an architectural issue. So if you have a really flat network with a lot of segmentation, and you've got students commingled with your, kind of production environment, certainly not best practice, but it is what it is. In some cases, they were just built that way, right? So kind of making the overarching kind of architectural changes required to be able to put access controls into place and to be able to, make sure that we have that principle of least privilege applied. Those have been kind of, it's not something, again, that you're going to be able to probably do before June the 9th if you hadn't already started. So bigger picture items, kind of underlying changes that have to be made in order to be able to do things like have a strong inventory of what belongs to us.
Mhm.
That's definitely been a challenge. It is something that we probably should have been doing already, but again, this has proven to be a forcing function to get those things in place.
But I guess it also sounds like, this deadline, while it is a big, scary date that, we highlighted in red when we reached out to everybody, it's sort of a rolling compliance function because we don't necessarily, that nobody has really stated when, how the education department
Exactly.
might reach out as far as enforcement. And so if we don't meet every, thing on that checklist by June 9th, it's not to lose heart or kind of throw up your hand. It's just, let's keep working, right?
Right. So what I would recommend, if you're not going to meet the requirements, and in a lot of cases folks won't for one reason or another. We don't have the budget, we don't have time, we don't have the personnel, lots of different reasons. I would recommend that you do sit down and come up with a plan. So let's say we don't have multi-factor authentication, we're still working through different solutions, or we don't have the budget this year. I would say sit down and say, this is our kind of schedule. We intend to have it done by October of 2024. Here's the glide path. So maybe phase one, we're going to do administrators. So multi-factor for anybody with administrator privileges. Maybe phase two, we have faculty and staff that have direct, access into our student information system, for example, our learning management systems. Have a phased approach and lay out the timeline for when you will be in compliance.
Mhm.
That is my experience, is that definitely is better than just throwing your hands up and saying, I'm not going to be able to do it, so I'm just going to come at me. So do sit down and think through, okay, I'm not going to have a penetration test by June the 9th. At this point in time, we just don't have time to get that team scheduled. We don't have the budget, et cetera, and so forth, but we're going to have it by this date. And then, annually thereafter, that will be the policy. So just sit down, find those gaps, and lay out the plan.
Yeah, so I guess that can then be part of that written security plan, and that, like, here's what we have, here's what we've done, and here's the plan for the stuff that we might not have in place yet.
And also with these plans, with your incident response plan, with your written information security plan and the associated program, with your training policies, these things need to be reviewed and updated as necessary, but at least annually. So just, these are living documents.
Mhm.
Just, a lot of folks in the past have done incident response plans, for example, and heaven forbid we have to use them, right? We don't want to have to use the incident response plan, but if we don't revisit it, it's sitting on the a printed copy sitting on the table gathering dust. That's one of the things that GLBA is trying to put into place, is that iterative process improvement approach. So we're going to start looking at things and making sure that at least annually we're keeping them up to date with current trends, current threats, etc.
Yeah. And I think one of the really cool things, if I can toot our own horn at Edge for a second, of our role in that process, if you need help, Dawn, her team, our team within Edge are working with institutions really sort of across the country on this stuff. And so we can bring, here's what's working here, here's what's working there. You're having the same challenge that X school in Ohio is having, and here's how we help to fix it. So, I think because we get to get our arms around lots of those written plans, lots of the challenges that other schools are having, we can help bring that to bear as we work with each individual institution, right? I'm sure there's lots of crossover.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's really good, the kind of virtual CISO approach, and the different institutions we work with. If something happens at one, we do really a lot of lessons learned, and try to improve everybody, which is, ideally, we're all improving to the point where the ransomware actors go and bother somebody else. That would be nice. I would like to be bored.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, that is the goal. So
So we didn't have any additional questions come in. I think we'll hang for a couple more minutes if anybody thinks of anything. If you want to hang around for a moment, but I think with that, that's the idea. We want to just make sure everybody's continuing to move in the right direction, and then just get those best practices in place so this stuff becomes a little more cookie cutter and a little easier year over year as we get better at this stuff. So.
absolutely. And please, as Adam put in the chat, follow up with Aaron or Michelle if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to ask offline because you didn't want to necessarily ask in the webinar. I'm glad to assist.
Yep, and we will be sending the recording around. So make sure to keep an eye out for that over the next few days, certainly by early next week, if not by the weekend. And I think with that, we'll wrap up here. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Everybody enjoy your holiday weekend, and let us know if we can be of any help or support in the process. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.